Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. We're glad you're with us. We have prayed ourselves in, so y'all pray yourself in. And we are still in the From Unity to Division book, page 112. If you have your books and in your Bibles, it's going to be 1 Kings chapter 11 is where we're going to be starting out. And like I say, we've prayed ourselves in. If y'all have any prayer requests, please let us know and we will get you hooked up. All right, so where did y'all leave off last week? Okay, so and y'all were talking about basically the temple being built.
Temple being there and it being great, and God's presence being there, and it was so strong that it ran the priests and everything out of the temple because the cloud was so full, it was so dark in there.
All right, very good. And so we're still talking about Solomon this week. Let me get that pulled up. And okay. So Solomon was the one to build the temple. David had asked God to let him build a temple for him. God says, "Nope, I appreciate it. Thank you for the offer, but you're not the guy. Your son's going to be the one to build the temple." And part of that was because David was a warrior king. He was like this ultimate fighting that they have on TV. He was the ultimate warrior. And God said, "You spilled too much blood, and the one to build my temple is going to be a man of peace, and that'll be your son." So Solomon comes along, and Solomon ruled for 40 years after David died. 40 years on the throne, never had a war, not one. Had some skirmishes here and there, and there were some people he had to put to death and whatever, but he never fought a military battle in his life. 40 years, pretty good record. But he was the man of peace, and where David was the man of war that took over and conquered people, Solomon was more a deal maker. He was the negotiator. He was the one that signed a bunch of treaties and kept the peace through peaceful means, through negotiation and whatever. So there were two. Solomon was the son of his daddy for sure, but he had a different path in life. So they were sort of opposites in a couple of ways. And so Solomon comes to the throne. I think he became king, what did we say, when he was about 15, I think? 15. We looked up. So he was, you guys are older than him when he became the king of the country. So he recognized that he was overwhelmed. He said, "How in the world am I supposed to rule this people? There's millions of them, there's one of me, and I'm only in my mid-teens here." And so he went to God and asked straight up for some help. And God basically said, "Okay, what do you want? Tell me what you want." And what did he ask for? Remember? There was one specific thing that he said, "God, I need this more than anything else."
He asked for discernment to know the difference between good and evil so that he can judge God's people.
That's it. He basically asked for wisdom, discernment, wisdom. Show me how to know what to do, because I'm going to be judging these people's disputes. I'm going to be ruling over them. I need your wisdom, God. And so God then, let's see if I've got it here. I think I did.
While you're looking at it, I just think it's interesting that Solomon asked for that, and it's sort of like a plumb line. To know the difference between good and evil is a standard.
Yes.
Just like a plumb line is a standard, it always takes you down to where you need to be, and it's a vertical standard. And if we know the difference between right and wrong, then we're right between God and ourselves and here on earth. And if you don't have this right, none of this will be right.
Good point.
And our society, not to take from you,
that's where I need to go
our
for
society does not know the difference between good and bad, man and woman, right and wrong. So the basis of everything is knowing the difference between right and wrong.
Yep.
That's why you're taught that from a young age.
There you go. And thank you. That's exactly on point for the lesson today. And just like you say, if that true line is not, if you tried to build your house by eyeballing it, go, okay, yeah, I'm gonna drop that line. Okay, cut there. It would be an absolute smoking disaster. It would be terrible. You've got to have true measurements to go by. And if you don't, you make a little mistake to start with, and then you have to correct something else to make that work, and the mistake gets a little bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, and before long you're completely off track. They said when they were doing the, I'm trying to remember the numbers and I don't have them, but you'll get the point. The numbers aren't exact, but the story is when they were going to the moon, when NASA was designing the moon trip back in the 60s, they determined that if they were, I think, half a degree off in their navigation when they left the launching pad, that they would miss the moon by 250,000 miles. Okay, it was so a half a degree here as you go out, and it diverges and diverges and diverges over the distance. They wouldn't be anywhere near the moon. Now, of course, they were making course corrections all the way up, but they said, okay, if we start out here and if we don't change anything, that's how it's that compounding effect is going to get worse and worse. So, and that's exactly what we're talking about today. Is Solomon asked for wisdom when he was 15. What did God do? He said, I love it. Good for you. Great job. He said, I'm going to give you wisdom. I'm going to give you wisdom like nobody has ever had before and nobody will ever have again. How's that for an answer? And then God continued. He said, because you have asked for this, and not victory over your enemies, and not for wealth, and not for long life, and not for a lot of children, whatever. Because you have asked for this wise thing, I'm going to give you all this other stuff. I'm going to give you long life. I'm going to give you wealth like nobody has ever seen before. I'm just going to shower you with everything. And so it was one of those like, ding, 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 ding. We have a winner. You got the exact right answer. So we're going to give you the grand prize. Okay. So that was God's answer to him. There was one little caveat in there, though. There's one little hitch. God said, as far as the long life, he said, if you will follow my commands and if you do what's written in the book of the law. Okay. So God gave him, he said, I am going to give you all this stuff. And if you will do what I tell you to do, then you'll get the long life along with it. Okay. So here we go. Solomon became what is widely considered the wisest man that ever lived for a while. He made some incredibly difficult decisions, but he made them with the wisdom of God, and it worked out beautifully, absolutely beautifully. He became a legend to where people, his peers, other kings and queens of other countries came to Solomon to sit at his feet and learn from him. Okay, and he's just this young guy. But here all these other royals were coming to him and learning from him. How do you do what you're doing? He had wealth. Over the years, he accumulated wealth that apparently to this day has never been equaled. He was the richest man to ever live. And there's descriptions all in the Bible about the wealth of Israel in those times. It was, they were in high cotton. The country was doing great. So it was going wonderfully. Okay. What did God say about marrying more than one person, or specifically a man having more than one wife? Was he for it or against it? Wasn't really. Okay. Didn't exactly outlaw it, but he said that the ideal is marriage between one man and one woman. Okay. Now it was it's common back in those days for a man to have more than one wife. They were populating the earth in those days, right? So they were that was not uncommon. but it was not God's ideal. So Solomon had all these blessings, and he took more than one wife, and we'll get back to that in a second. But Solomon was just covered up in all these blessings. It was probably just overwhelming to him. And it reminded me, this is going to seem completely off the subject, but the wealth and the blessings that Solomon had remind me of California. Okay, as goofy as that sounds, bear with me. I fly to California a lot, and every time I fly over California, the nice thing about being the pilot of the airplane is you have the best view, and you got the best seat in the house. We got windows all the way around. The windows go back to there, so we got the best view of anybody on the airplane. And we fly over California, and I look at that place. I love California, absolutely love it. California is an absolute paradise. They have the most beautiful beaches you've ever seen. They've got gorgeous mountains that are full of gold. They've got oil. They've got water. They've got some of the most fertile farmland on the planet. There are places out in the San Fernando Valley where the topsoil is 20 feet thick. I mean, it's just ridiculously fertile. It's ridiculously rich. They've got every conceivable. They've got even if you're into sustainable energy, which I love the idea of that. That's great. They've got what is probably the biggest wind farm in the world out there, certainly one of the biggest. It's in the valley just to the west of Palm Springs. There's a desert valley out there that's sort of a venturi in the mountains out there. It's just a natural wind tunnel, and they've got one of the biggest wind farms out there, so electricity's done. It's just amazing. They have every conceivable resource that anybody could have, and it should be an absolute paradise. And they have goofed up California so bad, it's barely recognizable from even when I started going out there 30 years ago. They have goofed it up to the point where it's nearly impossible to start a business or to run a business out there. In fact, businesses are leaving California in droves, along with people are leaving California because they can't stand the taxes, don't like the crime, and all of that. Elon Musk has moved Tesla out of California, moved it to Texas. They have, I don't know if you can say they've completely ruined it, but it's real close. They have just ruined the place. And I was talking with one of my FOs one day as we were flying out across there and looking at the amazing beauty of this place. And I said to him, just what I told y'all, they've got everything that anybody could ever want, any conceivable blessing that a place could have. How could they have goofed it up so bad? And his answer was, he was a Christian guy also. His answer was immediate. He said, how could they not? I said, what do you mean? He said, it all came too easy, man. They've got everything. How easy would it be when everything comes that easily to believe that, yeah, I did this because I'm so smart. I did this of the sweat of my own brow. I did this all by myself. How easy would it be? And you know what? I thought that was an excellent point. I'd never looked at it that way. How could they have not been corrupted? And that's kind of where Solomon is. He started out great. We've heard that before as we've talked about the other kings, Saul and different ones, that they started out great, started out doing a wonderful job, and over time, the blessings of their position corrupted them. That old saying, if you want that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that's kind of where these guys were. Excuse me, and something occurred to me. Well, let's look first at how Solomon messed up. We said a minute ago that he was the negotiator, he was the deal maker, he was the treaty maker. So he went to all the neighbors around there, all the ones that David had pretty much conquered, and he went to them and said, okay, yeah, we're the biggest army on earth, and you probably ought to keep that in mind, and let's make a treaty so we can all live in peace. Well, it was a common thing back then when you made a treaty with another country, that just kind of the way business was done, royal business was done back then. was that the king of the lesser country would give one of his daughters in marriage to the king of the greater country. It's just sort of a way to seal the deal, and it made sense because then you're binding the countries by marriage. Okay, so it's like a marriage covenant, sort of binds the peace treaty between the two. And Solomon, when he went away from God's ideal about marriage being between one man and one woman, when he went against that, oh, he went against it in a big way. Oh my goodness. Did y'all see the movie Vegas Vacation, whatever it was, Chevy Chase and that? Chevy Chase's son, he would go to a casino. He was about y'all's age, and he would go to a casino, and he'd put $1 in the thing and pull the handle and win a car. So he won a Corvette. And then he went down the street to another casino, put another $1 in, pulled the thing, and then he won a Hummer. He won like 5 cars. It was ridiculous. So this teenage guy comes back and he has 5 cars that he's won, and he said, "I put in $1, I'd win a car. I'd put in $1, I'd win a car." And so Solomon was kind of like that. He'd make a treaty, he'd get a wife. He'd make another treaty, he'd get another wife. He'd make another treaty, he'd get another. Well, he must have been one heck of a negotiator. Does anybody know how many wives and mistresses he ended up with?
It was over 1,000.
It was 1,000. He had 700 wives and 300, they call it concubines, and I've looked that up as basically like a mistress who wasn't quite married, but they were buds. And 1,000, 1,700 wives. And so, yeah. So when he went away from that one man, one woman thing, oh, he went away from it in a big, big old way. So then, okay, so we're starting out in 1 Kings. We'll finally get to the Bible verse here. 1 Kings 11:4. When Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away to follow other gods. These were women that had come from pagan nations, okay? They did not know God. They followed their own gods, the polytheism and all of that, and they sort of led him into it as well. He was not wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord his God as his father David had been. Solomon followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the abhorrent idols of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight, and unlike his father David, he did not remain loyal to the Lord. At that time, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abhorrent idol of Moab, and for Milcom, the abhorrent idol of the Ammonites, on the hill across from Jerusalem. He did the same for all his foreign wives who were burning incense and offering sacrifices to their gods. Okay, so he has stepped in a trap big time. And 700, I just can't, I don't know, I can't get my mind around that number, but anyway, or anything close to that number. But part of the reason, another commandment he broke was that God said, do not intermarry with all these pagan countries around Israel. Don't do it. They will lead you astray. God had made that abundantly clear. That was the rule. And Solomon broke it, and he broke it real hard. And exactly what God said would happen, happened. They started leading him away from his true God into their pagan gods. And so that's where he was at. He started sort of selectively deciding which one of the Bible rules he was going to follow. I'm going to follow this one, but I'm not going to follow that one. Slippery slope, bad idea. But that was how Solomon did it. And so that was where he was. And these things that when he was building the idols or the altars for these other gods, one of them said he built the idol of the Ammonites on the hill across from Jerusalem. There was the temple, this amazing, magnificent temple that he had built here in Jerusalem, but you could look right on the hill over there, just across the valley, and here was another idol to a pagan god that the same guy had built. It was completely dividing the attention of the Israelites from what they were supposed to be following. So that was where he messed up. The other thing that he did wrong was David, his father, Solomon's father, David. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. When David messed up, he was really good at recognizing that he had messed up and repenting, which is to turn away from what he had done wrong, and to apologize. The king of the country would fall down on his face and beg God's forgiveness. Lord, I have goofed. Please forgive me. Please show me how to get away from this and not do it again. He was a class 1 apologizer. And the thing is, that what made him so good is that God could see into his heart and recognize that it was legit. He really did mean it, and he really was asking for help. God respects that all day long. So that was what made David, as flawed and messed up as he was, that was what made David, by God's word, a man after my own heart. Okay, he was not perfect, but he knew how to repent. He knew how to apologize. Solomon didn't. He just pressed on. Okay, so he had made this terrible mistake, and he messed up. And I was reminded of something. I looked it up. It was Abraham Lincoln said this. He said, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power." You know, I'd thought about that. That's really good. If you want to see what's inside of somebody, give them everything they ever wanted. Give them power over other people and see what they do with it. It's a really good test. There's do y'all have a Voices from Church History from John Newton in their little insert somewhere in the first couple of pages? Voices from Church History. There are, what page? 114. Okay, page 114. Thank you. There are critical times of danger. After great services, great honors, and consolations, we should stand upon our guard. So after you've had a big win, after a big victory, be on guard. Noah, Lot, David, and Solomon fell in these circumstances. 118? Okay, 118, sorry. Noah, Lot, David, and Solomon fell in these circumstances. Satan is a footpad, and I had to look that up. I didn't know what that meant. That is basically a bandit, a roadside bandit. They used to call it, there's a highwayman, but basically is a roadside bandit. A footpad does not attack a man in going to the bank, but in returning with his pocket full of money. The devil will look for you when you have made it. Okay? That's when he knows that you're weak in a way, because it's a different weakness from when you're broke and destitute. That's a whole different weakness. He'll come after you again when you've succeeded beyond your wildest dreams, because you're tempted to think, yeah, I did this myself, right, or whatever. But you're kind of fat and happy at that point. You're feeling good about things and all of that. The devil can find a dozen different ways to attack you in those times as well. So he's saying, John Newton is saying to be on your guard when things are going exceptionally well. That's a really good thing to keep in mind as well. Okay, so, excuse me, so now we'll go to point 2 here, and that is verse 9. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He had commanded him about this so that he would not follow other gods, but Solomon did not do what the Lord had commanded. Then the Lord said to Solomon, "Since you have done this, and did not keep my covenant and my statutes which I commanded you, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. However, I will not do it during your lifetime for the sake of your father David." I'll back up to that in a second. "I will tear it out of your son's hand. I will not tear the entire kingdom away from him. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem that I chose." So God's saying, okay, this cannot stand. You're going down for this, but I promised your father David that you would survive as king, so I'll do that. However, your son is not going to have such an easy run of it. I'll take it away from your son, but I won't take the whole country away. Why? Because God had promised David that David's descendant would be on the throne from now on. So he had to provide a little remnant left. Okay, so, and because you have done this, we heard that all the way back in Genesis 3, right? When God said, because you have done this, this is what I'm going to do. You're going to hate it when God starts a conversation with, because you have done this. That is not a good way for God to start out. But it occurred to me, these kings, the different ones, God knew that Jesus was coming. God knew that he was going to send his son, and this was going to be the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords and the Savior of mankind. But it was almost like he let the people learn that the Son of God was not a regular human being. And I think, this is my thinking now, this is not scriptural, but it's my thinking that God put each one of these kings in place to show the people that it wasn't going to work in human terms, that a regular human could not pull this off. A regular human was not up to the task, any more than a regular human can keep all 10 of the commandments perfectly. Can't do it. God put the law in place to show us that we're incapable of living up to his perfection. Okay, and people will say, well, he's setting a trap. God is not holy because he set the trap. No, he did it as an educational thing to show us that this is my standard of perfection. Try as you might, you're incapable of living up to it. I did this not because I hate you, but because I love you. I want you to be my children, and I want you to see that you can't make it on your own. You need me. That's the way I designed it, and that's that. But we're hard-headed, so we have to learn it ourselves, right? So it seems like each one of these kings was a stepping stone that had his own flaws and failures and problems. Each different one pointed out a human failure. I talked to a married lady, very happily married one time, and she had dated a string of guys before she got married. And she said, in a way, I regret all that wasted time and all that wasted emotional drain and all of that went with these different men. But she said, I give thanks for them now. I went through an awful lot of hurt, but I give thanks for them now because looking back on it, I see that each one of them filled a spot in my mind that I was thinking this is what I wanted. Okay. Went out with the one that was rich and whatever, and he turned out to be not very nice, and then went out with another one that was really smart and intellectual, and she thought that's what she wanted, and turned out that that he wasn't very good either. And each one of these men fulfilled something that she thought she wanted, right, until she turned it over to God and said, just please take care of this because I quit. Okay. And God led her to her husband, they were perfect. They weren't perfect, but they were perfect for each other. So Solomon, I'm sorry, let's see here. David was the warrior king, but he failed from lust. Saul was the first king, but he failed from the power going to his head. Solomon was a king of peace, but he failed by compromising for all these wives that he came up with. Rehoboam, I can't say this word. Anyway, Solomon's son, Rehoboam, is that how you say it? Rehoboam, thank you. Okay, he was raised by kings, but he failed, we'll get to this in a second, he failed by ruling the people too harshly and not realizing that ultimately power comes from the ground up, comes from the bottom up. The others failed for other reasons. God is the only perfect, flawless king of our nation or of our lives. Okay, and we each have to learn that. I've had a saying that I've heard is that God gives us enough brains and grants us enough pain that we come to realize we can't get by without him. So that was that was where Solomon started drifting away, and things started getting crazy. And that's where we are today. Is let's see, where do I write this down? Is that Solomon started drifting off to these other gods and worshiping other gods, burning incense to these other gods, and doing all this stuff that he wasn't supposed to do, that God had told him not to do. And it made me think about something. There was a point in the book they made here that was really good. It said Solomon was worshiping the idols of defeated enemies. His dad had defeated all these countries, and then Solomon goes in and makes the treaty and gets the wife, and they come back, and they led him astray. Okay, these were countries that had already been beaten, and he was going and worshiping the gods of defeated nations. How crazy is that? That's just plain old everyday stupid. But I got to thinking about it. How many idols does our country worship today? Not so much the Christian community, we hope, but although there is some of that too. But how many defeated idols do people in the United States worship right now? Oh, how about Marxism? That is an absolutely my father-in-law and my family went to war in World War II to defeat Marxism, socialism, communism. They went to war and to defeat these very things, and now they're coming back again. Those are defeated enemies, and yet they keep coming back. And when that happens, when you start worshiping defeated gods, the insanity increases. It increased in those days, and it's increasing now. Dinesh D'Souza put it that socialism is the most soundly refuted philosophy on earth. It has been disproven every time it's ever been tried. It never works because it's not supposed to. It's supposed to lead to communism, and that leads to totalitarianism, where it's a full-blown dictatorship. But that's what occurred to me, is that we can look at Solomon and go, well, that was really dumb, but our country's doing the same thing. All right, and so we're worshiping at the idols of defeated enemies. We have to do the same thing that Israel has to do, and that is turn back to God and get your priorities straight. So then, just real quick here, so Solomon finally died, and his son took over, Rehoboam, and the people came to him. Now, this is a guy, it doesn't say how long he was king, but it wasn't long. This is like first shot out of the box. He's now the king, and this mass of people comes to him. And they said, your father wasn't all that great. He was really hard on us. The way it reads here in verse 3, it said, they summoned him, Jeroboam, and the whole assembly of Israel, and came and spoke to Rehoboam, who is the son. Your father made our yoke harsh. You, therefore, lighten your father's harsh service and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we'll serve you. Rehoboam said, go away for 3 days and then return to me. In that 3 days, he went to his counselors. He went to the old guys, the elders, and said, okay, how should I handle this? And they said, you know what? They're probably right. Ease up on them a little bit, make the load lighter on them, and they'll be loyal to you. They'll appreciate that, and they'll go to work for you. He went to some of his young buds and asked them. They said, no, that ain't going to work. You make it harder. You make it worse. Well, he decided to go with the advice of the younger guys. And he called them back 3 days later, and he said, yeah, nice try, but no, my dad was too soft on you. I'm going to make it worse. I'm going to make it a lot worse. Well, he had not established his power base yet. He was the king, but all these people said, you know what? I don't think so. You don't own us. We're walking. And they did. There's an old saying that a leader without any followers is just a guy out for a walk. Okay. The country walked away from him. Only one group stayed, and that was the tribe of Judah. They went to the south, and they kept Jerusalem, but the rest of the people went to the north, and they formed the country of Israel. The place split. The kingdom was divided, and it happened that quick after Solomon had died. Just instantly, because he failed to realize that power ultimately comes from the bottom up, and the people weren't going to follow him. So that was how the kingdom of Israel got divided into two kingdoms, Israel and Judah. And the one that stayed with the line of David, Judah, what's one of Jesus's nicknames? The Lion of Judah. Okay. So Jesus's line came through Solomon, through Rehoboam, I think is how you say it. So God fulfilled his promise. He kept the line going, but 11 of the tribes separated, and Judah was the only one left. So it's a fascinating study in leadership, or the lack of it, okay, and how getting away from God's plumb line, like Nick was talking about, does not work. It just doesn't. That's been the case in my life, and it's the case in history as well. Thank y'all for, anybody got questions, comments, whatever? We're out of time. So, all right. Well, thank y'all for coming. We appreciate it. We'll close. Want to pray us out? Feel like doing it? Okay, go for it. Do it loud here so we can hear.
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this day of fellowship. Thank you for bringing us all here today and for this lesson. Heavenly Father, have a safe trip and for the next preaching, Lord, and Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Well done. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank y'all for coming. Come back and see us live and in person when you can. We love you. Talk to you later. Bye.